Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Wasn't that music wonderful? It's the first time I've heard it in completion like that, and that's from the Deer Park Collective. That was just shared with us a few days ago, so thank you so much for, I think it came through Coyote Tracks. Yes, and we'll be sharing it. It was in the chat. The link for the music is in the chat, and then we'll probably also share it when you receive the recording. Probably in a few days. So I'd like to welcome you all here today. This is the 7th annual Buddhist Community Gathering, and we're zooming in from the unceded ancestral land of the Kumeyaay and Luiseno people, also known as Northern San Diego, California. My name is Judy Nakatomi, and I use she and we pronouns. Our Vista Buddhist Temple is a Mahayana Pure Land Jodo Shinshu tradition. And our roots in North America are over 125 years old. We were founded in Japan by our teacher, Shinran Shonin, a former Tendai monk, and who I consider a revolutionary teacher over 750 years ago. So I want to welcome all of our guests and welcome our teachers to resistance and regeneration amidst the chaos. We arrive from many directions today, and we are grateful you are here, if it's your first time or perhaps your 7th time. For some, our hearts are hurting as we are witnessing and enmeshed in chaotic times. Immigrant and refugee detentions, abductions in the workplace, extreme weather like today in many places, with devastating floods, hurricanes, and wildfires, numerous wars, and genocide. We need our practices more than ever to settle and ground and remember our roots, our community, and all our ancestors, including mountains and rivers and rainfall and forests and seeds. We are grateful to our teachers who have collaborated with us on our theme today. Just to give you a little bit of the flow for our gathering today, each teacher will offer a Dharma talk followed by a short break. After the break, the teachers will engage in conversation together based upon their Dharma messages today. And that will be facilitated by Casey Marume, followed by question and responses. We've received a number of questions from the registration, and then there'll be an opportunity to put questions in the chat to Casey. And that will be followed by some announcements, a few announcements, and an offering of merit. We owe so much to our Buddhist communities, our Sanghas, who hold and support and nourish us. So I'd like to invite us to just take a moment here, perhaps a few breaths, to invoke your Sangha siblings, your ancestors, whether they be blood, land, or spirit, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We just take a few breaths here as we invoke our ancestors. May our gathering of practice be of benefit to all. Thank you to the long line of resistors, thrivers, regenerators, and visionaries. May the energy of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness be of benefit to all beings. May we not cause harm. If we do cause harm, may we respond with humility and an open heart to acknowledge, learn, and repair. Palms together in Gasho in our Jodo Shinshu tradition in gratitude and reverence. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Buddhist. So it's an honor and a pleasure that I am going to be introducing each one of the teachers today. And the first teacher I have the honor of introducing is Chenxing Han. And I'm going to just bring my notes up here for a moment. Chenxing Han is an author, a speaker, an educator, and friend. Chenxing studies and practices and uplifts at the intersection of Buddhism and Asian America. Chenxing is the founder of Roots and Refuge and May We Gather, and her book, Be the Refuge, Raising the Voices of Asian American Buddhists, has helped many feel seen in a sea that sometimes forgets how long Buddhism has been here and continues to be practiced in North America. Welcome, Chenxing.
Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you so much, Casey. Thank you, everyone on the Vista Buddhist Temple team who've gathered us all today. It's so wonderful. Thank you, everyone who's joined. It's just so wonderful to see both familiar faces and new friends. I'm actually at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies right now in Barry, Massachusetts, and Ruth Ozeki is leading a retreat. So very graciously, she let me take some time off. So I feel very fortunate to be held in one container, Buddhist container in person, and now getting to join this wonderful gathering. I remember being at last year's gathering with Sister Peace and Reverend Melissa Opal and Reverend Lian Shutt as well, just with all of you in the audience, and just been reflecting on what an enormous, I mean, how much has happened in the past year. It's felt like it's gone both very, very quickly and also very slowly in some ways. There's just been so much pain and suffering in the world. And I also just want to thank my fellow co-panelists. It is such an honor to be with Reverend Patti Nakai and Brother Phap Luu. I think I knew of Reverend Patti Nakai's work from my late dear friend Aaron Lee, who wrote the Angry Asian Buddhist blog. I remember in November 2011, I think it was, he wrote about your Taste of Chicago Buddhism blog. And I had the great honor of meeting Brother Phap Luu in person when he came to be one of the Buddhist representatives from many different traditions at the 2021 May We Gather Buddhist Memorial Ceremony, which I think some of you here may have also been a part of. And of course, Judy, I think I met her first, well, through her words, her beautiful article on the evolutionary journey of mothering, and then getting to know her through the Roots and Refuge Sangha. So I was just thinking about all of these things, all of these connections. I know many of you here in this Zoom room that we're all in are connected to each other, maybe recently or many, many decades onward. And I was recalling back to when those of us, maybe about around the end of August, Judy and Casey and Brother Phap Luu and Reverend Patty and I were discussing what we wanted to share at today's meeting. And this was just shortly after Dr. Larry Ward's passing. So I think some of you may know Dr. Ward from his book, America's Racial Karma. You may know him as I first did with through the beautiful book that he co-authored with his co-teacher, co-conspirator, beloved wife, Peggy Roe Ward. And that book is called Love's Garden. And Reverend Larry Ward's Dharma name in the Plum Village tradition was True Great Sound. And what I wanted to share today was very much, I think, inspired by him and inspired in particular by this collection posthumously published called Morning Night, Poems on Spirit, Race, and Nature. So I'm going to resist the urge for the next 20 minutes to read, just a lot of poems to you, but I will weave a few of them in. And I wanted to open with this poem called The Lamp that Larry wrote. The most beautiful lamp I ever saw was made from pieces of glass left on the floor at the end of the day in the artist's workshop. The pieces sparkled, hidden, until seen as a dance of colors and light. With tender care, a full heart's hands reconstructed it, singing the brilliance of new wholeness. Hey, you, On this day, look down at the floor of your life, your heart. See the pieces of pain and joy lying on the floor waiting for you. Do not be disheartened. With tender care and patience, take these pieces with the hands of a full heart. Take these pieces of your precious life and beauty make for yourself and for all. And you'll have to imagine that in Dr. Ward's beautiful, deep baritone voice. And I was thinking how this gathering is a little bit like this artist's workshop, right? Like we're taking this moment just to stop and pause and look at all these pieces on the floor. We're examining what breaks our hearts, what lifts up our hearts. We're taking what might look like trash and asking, how do we turn this into something beautiful? How can we co-create maybe a work of art with this, a lamp of liberation that no single person can take credit for making, a lamp of liberation that looks nothing like anything we can buy in a store. Judy, before this talk, sent some really beautiful questions from all of you folks here. Some of you sent in questions beforehand. One that struck me was asking about, how can we grieve in these times of such isolation when so much trust is eroding? And it made me think of a line from one of these poems by Larry, Mother's Laugh. He says, "Here in the suchness of all things, don't hold back your tears. The desert of our hearts must be watered for the flowers to bloom." And of course, desert flowers sometimes take years to bloom, decades to bloom. And yet, those tears, those tiny little bits of rain along the way, I think they're watering something, even if we don't immediately see the results. And so, to that question of grief, certainly what helps me, or what I think about a lot, what I draw from the Buddhist tradition is really thinking about rituals that allow us to embody and express our grief. So that might take the form of crying, but it might look like dance. It might look like making a collage or tending an altar or folding origami or gardening on, my tiny condo balcony. And it might just be like this little micro practice, taking one moment to just pause to feel grief's presence in your body, the sensations it brings up, and offer it even just a moment of welcome. Maybe it's not the right time and place to really full on let all of the, desert watering tears flow. But I think there's always a micro moment to just say, hello, friend, hello, grief. How would you like to move through me right now? And I think this depathologizing grief and really remembering, universalizing it, remembering it is this human response to a samsaric world. I think of grief as an ancestral emotion. So sometimes when I'm visited by grief, I feel I'm actually being visited by a wise ancestor. In another of Larry's poems, the title is Love Flows, he writes, "I held hands with ancestors of blood, land, and spirit. They trembled with power. I saluted." And I know I tend to get in trouble only when I deny grief's right to exist, only when I fail to salute to grief. So, ritual, which is sort of thinking about sacred intention and then acts of repetition, it's so central. This is so central to so many Buddhist traditions. We have dana, generosity, sila, ethical precepts, the practice of ethical conduct. We have bhavana, these various mental and spiritual cultivations. All of these are really ongoing practices, right? They're lifelong practices. Like I say, they span multiple lifetimes. Um, and what makes a lifelong practice sustainable? I think it's not obligation, but actually joy or rejoicing. I sometimes feel that that dimension can be lost when the popular conception of Buddhism in America can sometimes be very, very serious, maybe sometimes even a bit dour. And I just wanted to read this little snippet from a book I'm really enjoying right now called Words for the Heart, A Treasury of Emotions from Classical India by Maria Haim. So it's a lovely collection of 177 different emotions from classical India, and they're in Sanskrit, Prakrit, Pali. But this is the entry on Anumodana, which means applauding and rejoicing in others' virtue. So that's in Pali and Sanskrit. Anumodana is a feeling of jubilation and rejoicing upon witnessing others perform good deeds or acts of worship. The feelings of exultation at observing others' spiritual advancement are encouraged as highly meritorious. When you give a gift or attain spiritual insight, I should celebrate. This counters envy and selfishness. In the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Buddha himself is said to have achieved his awakening in part by rejoicing for countless eons at the merit of others. Buddhist traditions have a ritually ordered sense of how one should celebrate others doing well. Many Buddhists see almsgiving to monks as a community event in which everyone, not just the donor, should endeavor to touch the gift and say, "Well done," so that all might share in the merit and happiness of the gift. I got a chance to do this just this morning when we gave a meal offering to Bante, to Bhikkhu Analayo, who lives here at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, and we get to collectively offer his meal. I gave the grapes. Giving is not a zero-sum game with a limited amount of merit redounding to the donor. Rather, it multiplies by the number of people who rejoice in it, just as a flame can be taken from one lamp to light many without diminishing the light of the first. So I was thinking about Anumodana earlier this week, and when I was talking to a friend who is actually here today, who lives in a very remote part of the US in the woods, and this is someone who has a really beautifully strong connection to Buddhism, to nature, and also someone who feels grief as they watch these logging trucks, take trees out of the forest. And so, what is both a source of solace and inspiration is also a source of pain, thinking about these bigger systemic violences that are happening. And, they shared that they had, with a friend, planted maybe 20 baby trees and just kept thinking, this is not enough. How can this do anything given the vast scale of these logging companies? And I was reminded of, again, one of Larry's poems called Verses from Hell. And he says, he has to remind himself, I am more than this theater of mind sense. He realizes a moment when he's caught in the metroplex of my mind in one of the seductive theaters. So I think I find myself susceptible to the seductive theater of what can I possibly do in the face of everything? It's not enough. Um, and and then this friend shared, I asked, so what helped? They shared zooming out a little bit and remembering, you know, not all 20 of these baby trees are going to survive. Maybe none of them will, but maybe one or maybe a few will. And any one of those trees could someday become a massive tree, could become essentially the progenitor of infinite trees into the future. And I think there's something about, for me, I really appreciate the Buddhist tradition, Buddhist traditions for helping remind me that it's always possible to kind of zoom in and out when we're thinking about time and when we're thinking about space. So, for example, we can simultaneously hold multiple scales of time. There's kind of urgent time, immediate time, what needs to be done now. But I think there's also dream time, visionary time. What can we imagine generations from now, lifetimes from now, kalpas from now? And it's the same with space. We can act hyper locally, this tiny little patch of land on which these trees will be planted, but also I think that can expand to a global dimension. If one tree, one of those baby trees grows one day, you don't know, a bird from halfway around the globe might find some shelter there. Um, what we do on this hyper local scale has these karmic effects that we really may never know. And so, will we let that not knowing stop us from planting the tree, stop us from this seemingly tiny action? So, me hearing about those 20 trees, I feel such anumodana. I feel rejoicing and joy because I think the difference between 0 trees and 20 trees is infinite. And actually, the difference between 0 trees and one tree is infinite. And this seems like a good time just to read the poem titled Trees from Larry's poetry collection. I've been listening to trees, redwoods, pine, oak, too many to name. They worry and pray over us, offering gratitude. A message. We do not love deeply enough or wide enough. This is the cause of our madness. So there were several questions that were shared relating to, you know, thinking about social justice, thinking about resisting fascism during these times, thinking about how do we practice when we may be facing abuse or facing trauma. And one of Larry's poems is called My Teacher. And this is referring, of course, to his beloved Thich Nhat Hanh Thich. And there's a line in the poem that says, I wake up each day hoping the world won't break my heart. But it does, again and again. Break it open, I say. So to the pain and the chaos and the suffering, I say, let's listen to it. And then as for how to respond, I think there's a real importance to cultivating a sense of samvega. Here's another Buddhist emotion. It's kind of often paired with pasada. So samvega and pasada, my partner Trent, who's here on this call, has translated it as stirring and stilling. The stirring is kind of like a sense of quaking or spiritual urgency, something that compels us actually to act, even if it's in a small or immediate way. Larry has another poem in which he talks about, there's a state of massive emergency in the world, and yet often no urgency. We're just rubbernecking. So, I think of this sense of spiritual urgency. It actually makes me think of Renyo Shonin, the eighth Monshu of the Honganji Temple of Jodo Shinshu. And I think many people here might be familiar with white ashes. Certainly if I remember hearing that at a friend's relative's funeral, which is conducted by Reverend Harry Bridge a few years back. And there's a line in this letter, White Ashes, that says, we depart one after another more quickly than the dewdrops on the roots or the tips of the blades of grasses. So it is said. Hence, we may have radiant faces in the morning, but by evening we may turn into white ashes. And this is, of course, a reminder universal, I think, to Buddhist traditions around impermanence, which can, of course, be very difficult to sit with. I was thinking about it just a couple of days ago when my partner Trent has been translating the oldest Lao manuscript that to survive that we have from 1606. It's a part of this larger collection of short sermons that monastics preach to lay people. And this particular sermon is from the commentary to the Dhammapada. The title, the Patipujita Deva Kanyavatu, is translates to the story of the female deity who was devoted to her husband. And so while our modern sensibilities may not fully like some of the gender dynamics in the story, I still think this story, to me, it just felt so fascinating and evocative. So I'll just briefly summarize the female deity in question. She's part of an entourage of a god who's in Tavatimsa heaven. Tavatimsa is where the Buddha preached the Abhidharma to his mother. So it's this heaven. And this god has 1,000 people at the entourage, one of whom is this divine deity. And as she's plucking flowers that they're going to turn into garlands for this god, she just reaches the end of her natural lifespan. So she just disappears from the heaven and gets reborn in the human realm. And there she marries into a Buddhist family, and she's very devoted to supporting the monastic sangha. So she's always there making offerings, and there she just becomes a pillar of that community. And then suddenly she's 50 years old, and one morning she goes to the temple as always, but then that evening a sudden illness strikes her and she passes away. And this whole time she's been making offerings, she's been hoping, I would like to be reunited with the husband, the God husband up in the heavens, hence, her name, devoted to her husband. And so she reappears in the heavens, that same heaven. And then her God husband says, oh, I didn't see you early this morning. Where'd you go? And she explains what happens. And he's really, really confused. He says, could you explain? Oh, and she says, humans, the not long lived live 10 years, then die. Some reach 20 years, then die. Some 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And so he says, oh, should that be so? What about humans who dwell without heedlessness? and make merit, give alms, uphold precepts, cultivate loving kindness, metta, contemplate impermanence. What about them? And she says, those people who do all those things, they're actually quite few. Yeah, they just assume they will live for uncountable eons. Such people are numerous. And this male deity is just profoundly stirred. And he says, well, 100 years in a human realm is a single day here in Tavatimsa, and our lifespans are 1,000 years. So that's 36 million human years. When humans have such a short lifespan, how can they dwell in heedlessness? He's really shaken up. Meanwhile, back in the human realm, the monastics are really shaken up. They say, wait, where's Patipujita? She was just here this morning. Where is she? And the Buddha explains what has happened. And so I think in these contemplations of impermanence, and I think the story is not just about that, it's also about the power of generosity, it's the power of vows or aspirations. And we don't all have to vow to be reborn with our heavenly husbands. We can channel our vows and aspirations in other ways. But I think that is so, it's just so powerful. And so I think there's this question too of how can we relate to that truth of impermanence in a way that feels generative and not paralyzing? From another of Larry's poems, it's called Enter Your Life. He says, here between earth and sky, listen, hear your footsteps in the leaves of time. Fix your gaze on the horizon of not yet, but. Stay in this moment and ask in this great symphony, what is my instrument? What is my music? What is my song? And I want to check the time. Judy, is this, I'm trying to see if I have time for one more, but I know we started a little bit over.
Yes, you
Yeah.
have time. Yes,
Okay.
please.
So I'll just wrap up here briefly, but I find that to be such a beautiful question to think, to ask these questions, particular to us, our own particular conditioning, gifts, voice. And, I love this other line from Larry that the poem Be Like Rain, he really invites us to be like the rain, falling without worry, because nothing less is worthy of our souls. So I've just been soaking in this beautiful collection in nature, thinking about ritual, thinking about impermanence, thinking about rejoicing, thinking about how these connect. And I think just to close, if you'll permit me, one more poem from Larry from True Great Sound, that I think really speaks to the themes that we are discussing today. And this poem is called The Crossing. To cross the great water of frozen perception is the great adventure of our epic. Learning to love is the great path of all earthlings, bound to this world of disturbance and light. Stepping out of the constructs created by others to be less than, more than, even equal. We have been underestimated. You can feel it in your heart. We shape ourselves. We are no longer caught in the net of shiny things or rusty ideas of power. We shape ourselves again and again, tasting freedom in radiance. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Chenxing. Thank you for welcoming grief into our gathering here today in such a beautiful way, and sharing Larry's poems with us. Many of us still are feeling the quake in our hearts of the loss and transition of a great teacher to great sound. Thank you again. Next, it's also an honor to introduce our next teacher. For many, probably needs no introduction. I'm going to do my best here to be brief. Brother Phap Luu is a beloved senior Dharma teacher in the Plum Village community of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. Um, Brother Phap Luu's dedication has many streams, and I'm only going to name a few here today. In education, folks are really excited about a new school that's going to be opening at Deer Park Monastery very soon. Brother Phap Luu has also been activating the wake up movement of young people for many, many, many years, which is growing. And also in support of community living and organic farming through the Happy Farm initiative, through Deer Park Monastery and also Plum Village, France. He teaches in several languages. I've heard him in English and Spanish, and just learned recently, and also in French, and is the co-author of the new-ish book called Hiking Zen, Train Your Mind in Nature. Welcome, Brother Phap Luu.
Thank you so much, Judy. I was just looking at Judy's lamp transmission photo yesterday, is celebrating the new Lay Dhamma teachers in the Plum Village tradition, of which she is one of our local representatives. So, dear Thai, dear friends, I'm so grateful and honored to be here today to support and be part of the Vista Buddhist virtual community. Thank you, Chenxing, for that wonderful talk. I feel there's so much to unpack in what you shared. I was at the limit of. I mean, it was just so full and rich, and I was full of anumodana while you spoke for the merit of your Dharma sharing. Um, uh, I wonder if we could listen to a sound of the bell to start, just to enjoy breathing. Some of you are familiar with the Plum Village tradition. We often have bells in the monastery, and from time to time we like to invite one so we can remember to come back to our breathing and really anchor ourselves in the present moment. And we say often that the bell is a friend, and the sound of the bell we hear not only through our ears but also through every cell of our body. So it's inviting us to wake up. Awakening is a collective experience of all the cells of our body, and it's also a collective experience of the Sangha body. And when we open our heart, then we see it's all the seeds of awakening are already there. Mm. So I had some fun memories coming up as I listened to uh, Chenxing share in where you're at Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. When I was just before I became a monk, I went to Maple Forest Monastery, which was our first center in the U.S. on top of a hills in South Woodstock, Vermont. And then I wandered around. Actually, I share a little bit about it in the Hiking Zen book, about this kind of wandering down and then building a raft and flowing down the Connecticut River for a bit. But I actually ended up at Barry Center for Buddhist Studies eventually. And I was, I remember I had this mosquito net, and it was the middle of summer, 2001, and I, I was kind of a Dharma bum with a big beard, and and I ended up sleeping in the woods behind the center, and I wanted to learn Pali and translate the Satipatthana, so I wanted to use the library, so I was coming in, and they were kind of like, "Who is this person? Where is he staying?" I was getting eaten alive by the mosquitoes in the forest behind there. No matter what I tried to do, they would find their way in the mosquito net. I tried to sleep under a rock back there, and then the cook at the time in the center, she knew I was camping, so she said, "Oh, wait. This is before the forest refuge was built, and there was a little kuti. There was a little kuti in the woods there, and so I lived there for like a few weeks." And the refuge center had blueberries coming out, and it's just this wonderful experience of just the spontaneous nature of the Dhamma, and just coming down and grabbing some blueberries in the field. I was a little bit hurt when they built the forest refuge in that blueberry field, although I'm sure it's been a refuge for many people. But I thought this meadow is already a refuge. Why do we need to build a refuge? Anyway, mm. Yeah, I'm very moved by the topic. How do we resist? What does it mean to live our lives in a regenerative way? And what is chaos? So I think those are very open questions, and the things that I practice to reflect on lately, as I see that, growing up here, as many of us as an American, just seeing many things that we had relied on in the past, not being as stable or permanent as we expected, perhaps. And it does make me think of Thai's teaching of the non-toothache, right? Thai often said, Thai is our teacher, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, often said that most of the time we don't have a toothache, but we don't appreciate that non-toothache until we have a toothache, and then we all we wish for is just to be rid of this toothache, and here we are with a toothache here, and so I think all of us maybe are appreciating more the good conditions that we have had in our lives, and that helps us to have strength for the challenges. Here in Southern California, I know many of our lay Sangha members are in networks helping to alert folks when ICE comes to take away even sometimes U.S. citizens. Um, and that is based on the good seeds that we've nourished in the past in our community, and how we've built community and built um, networks of trust. And so I'm here at Deer Park. We are very engaged and just you know kind of we want to flood the world with joyful and inspiring things. I think a lot of times in the past we would hold back and think, oh gosh, maybe that's mm, how are we gonna follow up on that project, or how are we gonna do this or that, and we might have some doubts and hesitation. But now it's just like, okay, pull out all the stops. We just have to just do what we can, and then hope that the bodhisattvas will manifest to help. Because in all of our lives we have the capacity. Actually, we have much more capacity than we know we have, and it's merely just overcoming our doubts and hesitation. And so a lot of, I think, realizing bodhicitta, in my experience, is just removing the stops. Like what is stopping us? Is it our fear? And Tai would often stop us and say, when we were making a decision, are you doing that based on fear, or are you doing it based on compassion? And so we remove all those actions of body, speech, and mind that are based on fear. And that's something we can see directly. When with the practice of non-self, we, slowly we able to let go of the attachment to this body and what will happen with this body. And I think very much in the line of the story of the devoted wife that Chenxing shared. You see that our good actions persist lifetime after lifetime. I think the misunderstanding is that there's a self that goes from one to the other, right? I just finished a commentary on a book which is a compilation of Thay's teachings on rebirth called Reincarnation. A little bit controversial. We decided to call it that because we had so many questions from people. Do Buddhists believe in reincarnation? Thay didn't like that word, but now there's a book with Thay reincarnation, and it's because we want to understand the nature of how our actions continue out into the world, our thinking, our speech, our bodily actions. And so I hope that book, this book that just came out, addresses those questions in people's hearts, because with that we know that we're in a stream, and in this very short lifetime, what we can realize as far as you know contributing peace, calm, happiness, joy. Uh, we want to spend as much time as possible on those things, and as little time as possible in criticizing, judging. Because actually, one of the questions that is, I was looking at some of them. Um, how can we be peaceful and kind and still dissent in a powerful way? Well, being peaceful and kind is one of the most powerful ways of dissenting that I know of. And so I think yes is my answer to that question. Um, yeah, it's not. I mean, it's actually when we descend to fear that we lose the power of dissent. Um, and yeah, I say that very much embedded in the community, which is, I think, largely maybe 98% operating free from fear. Maybe a little bit less. I want to maybe notch it down to 87%. It's not that fear doesn't come up in the monastic community for different kinds of things, but I think that when we reflect on Thai life and having spent time close with Thai in the first 15 years of my monastic life, I feel that I cannot say one time when I saw Thai operating based on fear. And that includes a very rough moment when a whole monastery with 400 monastics was being expulsed in the central highlands of Vietnam, the Prajna Temple. And those are Thai students, and Thai's, you know, really in some measure to get back at Thai, like kind of they were poking at Thai by threatening his students in Vietnam because they didn't like what Thai said about the Dalai Lama in China and various things, and also about the government of Vietnam. So I, seeing Thai and working closely with Thai at that time in Plum Village, Thai was just Thai was had so much love and concern for his students, but he didn't have fear. He would write letters almost every day sometimes, but certainly, every week to all the brothers and sisters there, and how happy he was, those letters, how happy he was that they were the depth of their practice and the practice of nonviolence, not responding with violence to really undercover police that were being bussed down and blaring with the megaphones right into the ears of the monastics, chanting the name of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. I mean, it's just really stuff that's I mean, really traumatic experiences. Even some of our brothers and sisters are only starting to be able to process now and talk about now, 15 years later. it was really the peace and the kindness of the response of those young brothers and sisters to that aggression that was the powerful dissent. I mean, the easier way would be to fight back. The easier way would be to, yell and scream. But they sat days and days just chanting the name of Avalokiteshvara in the meditation hall as one Sangha body. And that made the bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood between them unbreakable. And that's what I feel every day living in Deer Park. And so these wonderful projects like the Thich Nhat Hanh School of Interbeing, which I hope some of you may be coming up tomorrow. If you're local, we'll have a family day of mindfulness and talk about the school and what its vision is to welcome K through 5 kids next September 2026, right here at the foot of the monastery. Thai's approach is always planting seeds. It's limited what we can do in a march. It's limited what we can do. It doesn't mean we don't march, but we should not have put our thinking ahead to the march. We should be asking, what are we doing right now to dissent in a powerful way? What am I doing right now? And then the next moment and the next moment. And what we can do is cultivate this solid base of joy, of happiness, of freedom from fear. And so, how do we do that? Um, well, we start with the bell, start with the breathing. But deeper down, I think Tai always reminded us to take refuge in the three jewels in our heart: the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Not to see the Buddha, of course, as something outside, but to recognize that quality of awakening that's right in every cell of our body. Mother Earth is in every cell of our body, and she's waking up. She wants to wake up. So we need to look at the ways in which we are hindering that awakening. Usually we look at it the other way, like I have to work really hard for awakening. But more often it's just removing the obstacles. Oftentimes, the avarana, right? There's the klesha varana, the jneya varana, the obstacles of our afflictions and obstacles of knowledge. And so when we're constantly, compulsively reading the news, how are we creating obstacles of knowledge to our own awakening? As well as in the level of afflictions, of anger, fear. So, we learn to limit what we consume because what we eat is what we become. And we eat through our senses as well, not only through material food. And so that's our practice. And we support one another. So I think, a powerful way to dissent is to live in community. And that's was one thing to go to demonstration on a given day, but what if you actually, like has happened now, 3 young families have just up and moved to the foot of Deer Park Monastery. They've up, because they want to live in community. They want to send their kids to the school. They want to build that school, and they want to be part of a larger spiritual community. And that's realizing the practice of upasika, which is dwelling near the Sangha. So that is an act of resistance. I really respect that. It's not easy for a family to actually, we can talk about community and we have virtual communities, but to actually uproot yourself and move and live in community, that is a powerful act of dissent. So these are just some things I want to leave space. I very much look forward to Reverend Patti's sharing, but I just want to put in a little bit of what we are doing here at Deer Park, the school, the Happy Farm. Yeah, these are things we want to inspire. We want to do a Thich Nhat Hanh Museum and Cultural Center in Los Angeles. It's a building up for that, so we can have a physical location in the Los Angeles area. But all those things they happen because we have joy in the present moment, and we are acting free from fear. So that please, that I have fear comes up. So I'm not saying, but I know how to practice to remove the fear. I know how to embrace it with the seed of mindfulness in my mind consciousness. So thank you so much for listening, and pass it back to Judy.
Thank you, dear brother. I'd like to ask for a bell if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the reminder that we are planting seeds. It reminds me of the Plum Village song about, I think it was the Wake Up song, maybe, planting seeds for community, for humanity. Very beautiful. And it reminds me of Ty's book on In Love and Trust. I think he published some of those letters that he wrote to the monastics in Vietnam. And it's been an inspiration to many of us. Well, now it is my honor to introduce our third teacher today. And Reverend Patti Nakai is a minister emerita in the Jodo Shinshu tradition, Pure Land tradition. And Reverend Patti, I hope you don't mind my saying, but Reverend Patti is kind of a trailblazer for women in Buddhist ministry in North America. I've been listening to and watching Reverend Patti from afar for quite a while. An elder in the tradition, a social justice leader, taking a vocal stand really early for Black Lives Matter, for the movement, advocates for LGBTQ plus equity, and shines a light on violence against Asian Americans. As mentioned, Reverend Patti is a Pure Land Jodo Shinshu scholar who always seems to be keeping her eye on the pulse of national and global geopolitics with a full and engaged, and I would say courageous heart. Welcome, dear Reverend Patti Nakai.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here at the Buddhist Temple of Chicago, and the internet actually has gone on us a couple times during this streaming, so I apologize if I freeze up a couple times. I wanted to begin my talk, and this is the traditional Jodo Shinshu way of beginning a talk, quoting the words of Shinran Shonin. Shinran, who was in the 12th century Japan, one of the great teachers of the Pure Land tradition. And this comes from the third verse of his Jodo Wasan, the verses on the Pure Land. And I think a lot of people who hope that's not me making the echo. I'm familiar with this verse, but I'm going to read my English translation of it. The shining wheel of liberation has no limits. The light of wisdom touches every life and breaks down the divisions of haves and the have-nots. Let us base our lives on the awakening to equality. Namami. And so that particular verse brings out the two things I like to talk about in Buddhism in general is freedom and equality. And one of the things I do as a volunteer since I've retired is I've been teaching online courses to two Illinois state prisons. And that's what I tell them. Buddhism is freedom and equality, even though they are in situations where it might not seem so doable, but to me, they're like bodhisattvas, in their situation to be practicing these principles. So I really, it's such a privilege to learn from them. And so the theme of this thing, the resistance and regeneration among the chaos, I want to kind of take you back to the Vista story of the historical Buddha coming out of the palace. He was a prince, and the so-called story that he comes out of the palace. But I'd like to say that that story represents us. Most of us brought up in a middle class, very sheltered life. And coming into adulthood, we're exposed to a lot of things we were not previously aware of so much. And so I think that's what the story said. Buddha comes out of the palace where he was very sheltered, and he sees chaos. He sees all of these people in the streets. He sees all of this activity going on. And traditionally, the story we always tell, I was a Dharma school teacher, that's a Sunday school. So we always tell the story to kids all the time. He sees old age, sickness, and death. But when I think about it, I think in the palace, he already saw old age, sickness, and death. But in the palace, he sees that the elderlies are taken care of, the sick people are taken care of, even the deaf people dying are treated with dignity. But going out into the streets, he's seeing that's not happening. A lot of older people look like they're frail and no one's helping them. People are sick and just on sometimes just looking very ill and frail, and no help is around them. And when people die, it's not such a dignified thing. And maybe the way their family members try to do the final rites, they're not able to afford a real fancy ritual send-off. So I think when we do talk about Buddha going out of the palace, it should be about he's confronting chaos. He's going from a very ordered environment to seeing what life is like all around us. And I think that's true for all of us. Most of us were brought up in a very ordered environment. And then as we look at the world around us, we do see chaos. And from time to time in our lives, chaos enters. Especially being in the city, sometimes there's violent episodes. Right now, as you know, in Chicago, we just had a lot of chaos going around. And what I think the Buddha saw is, what is this causing this chaos? Why am I seeing people really miserable? And I'm seeing people in conflict. And not just what he's seeing outside the palace, but as you all know, he was brought up in a warrior class. And all his training was to become a soldier, to become a general, be like his father. So he knew the life ahead of him would also hold the chaos of entering warfare. So I think he left the palace to become a seeker, to find the answers. Why do people have to suffer? Why do we have to fight? So he went through the 6 years of trying different teachers to find what can we get to the root cause of these things. And as we all know, the story was he became awakened under the Bodhi tree. And there's a lot of different explanations of the what this enlightenment entails, but I like to use this word wholesome. I found it in a lot of Dhammapada translation, wholesomeness. He realized what we need to attain, or what we need to awaken to, is wholesomeness, the idea of being whole. And I heard a great talk by Bhikkhu Bodhi. I'm sure all of you know of him. It's on the Upaya Zen Center website. They're very good about putting up recordings of the guest speakers. And in his talk, I think a lot of you are familiar with the metta prayer, the chanting, may all beings be happy and free. But this word happy is kind of vague. And so I think what Bhikkhu Bodhi did, he broke it down to 4 values. And he's saying how, as Buddhists, we uphold the wholesomeness of these values. That's what makes our life whole as humans. And we have to resist the pressures in society that break apart that wholesomeness, that lead to unwholesomeness. So like I say, Buddhism is not so much about good and evil, but it's about enhancing wholesomeness of life versus breaking up that wholesomeness, breaking down what makes us feel whole. And so the 4 categories he talked about, the first one was, the basic one is just things like food, housing, and he said nature, being in touch with nature, having trees and plants around, maybe to see a body of water, to see a nice desert or field, to have that feeling besides the basic food and housing. So that's one very basic way to become address our wholesomeness. The next level up, he called social, and that's having our network and support groups of friends, families, and neighbors, having this sense of mutual support. And so like the first level, of course, we see a lot of people don't have those things like enough food or adequate housing. And a lot of people grow up in their lives not having that access to nature. So in the next category, the social one, I think there's a lot of people being ripped from the social fabric, specifically jails and prisons and people who are put in solitary confinement, people just taken out of the social fabric. But there's people even who are not incarcerated who have disconnected from the social fabric. So because of pressures in society. The next level is the aesthetic level, and that's to be wholesome, we need access to the arts, the culture, the dancing and the poetry, and to not just receive those things and appreciate it, but to participate and to be encouraged to express ourselves in those artistic ways. So he's saying, Bhikkhu Bodhi is saying in this digital context with the artificial intelligence thing, sometimes a lot of that's being taken away from us. And we're kind of put in these little niches instead of having that sense of participation and expressing ourselves. And then lastly, the overall category, spiritual, what you call the ultimate wholesomeness. And we, luckily for all of us who are here Buddhists, we know how important that is to have that sense of cultivating our spiritual, but so much in society is against that. It's not even acknowledging a spiritual aspect to our lives, or else they create some idea of God that's very anthropomorphic, and it's just a projection of authoritarianism. So those four values, I think, really address what really should be wholesome. So instead of just merely saying, may all beings be free and happy, maybe all beings have that wholesomeness of access to nature and clean water and air, have access to vibrant social networks, have access to artistic endeavors and expression, and have being encouraged to really develop their spiritual nature. So I think that kind of is a lot more concrete than just saying we wish beings to be happy and free. So that idea of oneness, I think this wholesomeness kind of brings in all the different aspects of what we want to encourage. And I think the resistance in Buddhism is to really bring out these values and show people how so much of our society is trying to divide us. So that's why I think in that verse I quoted from Shinran, a lot of people translate it as this philosophical divide between existence and non-existence. But I like to say haves and has not, because that's what's dividing us. If people have to have certain characteristics, certain physical characteristics, a certain amount of wealth, or a certain amount of education, those things that divide us. And so we, as Buddhists, we need to resist that and point that out, that we're not to other people, but to have this sense of oneness. And of course, the regeneration is by emphasizing these values. So I think metta, this loving kindness, is not just a thought. It's not just in putting out this thought of may all beings be wholesome and free, but putting it into words. Talk about it with your fellow Sangha members, talk about it too in public, and also putting into action in different ways. And I know a lot of you are in groups where you are taking some kind of action. But the other thing and this is kind of like what Judy touched on, it can't just be your immediate community sometimes. Sometimes you do have to see there's a wider world involved. And right now I'm dealing with a lot of issues, but then I look on social media and people in Gaza, their tents are being flooded. They're living in tents that are being torn apart by the rain, and that's chaos. And they've been living in chaos for the last 2 years, as you probably know, just being attacked with all kinds of bombs and violence, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. So I really think it's important for us to be aware of the wider world that's going on and things going that we should be sending out those same thoughts for wholeness and freedom to all those beings. A lot of you that may be in the Jodo Shinshu tradition, we know, especially in our children's services, we recite the golden chain. And that was something that was come up by Ernest and Dorothy Hunt, two people that were helping the Hawaii group put things into English for services. And so they came up with this thing called the golden chain. And we usually, have it for the children to recite, because they're not going to go into a lot of big sutra chanting and stuff, but it's something that you can have the children recite. And one of the lines is, I will protect those who are weaker than myself. And I think about for kids, who is weaker than them? So maybe in their mind as babies, like little brothers or sisters, kittens, puppies, they think of these smaller things. They're pretty small to begin with, but things that are smaller than them. And they want to foster that sense of protecting them. But I think for us adults, maybe a better line that we should be thinking about is, may I support those who are less privileged than myself. And to think about those who don't have the same access to a lot of the opportunities that we have, those who may be subject to a lot of negative things going on, that to think of them and think of what we can to support. There's a lot of things you can do to support. A lot of communities have mutual aid right now to help a lot of people going through food shortages. And there's a lot of broader things going on. One of the great pains of grief I've been feeling just today is finding out that the disability activist Alice Wong had passed away yesterday. And though she's not directly related to Buddhism, I've been following her. And she was heading up this group called Crips for eSIMS, where she got the disability community to promote the idea of contributing money to help the people in Palestine be connected to the internet through these eSIMs. And so even though she's part of the disability community, she's thinking outside. She's thinking of the people who don't even have the connection that she is privileged to have. And so I can't help but feel grief that someone like her has passed away. And I think even what she's done for the disability community, we have to be grateful for, because all of us think we're able-bodied, but that is not, and some of you probably have experienced it when you're sick or injured. You realize how much the world is built for able-bodied people. So we want to advocate for accessibility and always including disabled people. And I think another thing that our society puts a lot of emphasis on is people have to be deserving. People have to do hard work. People have to get wholesome things. They have to earn it through doing some kind of work or contributing to society. But the disability community reminds us that each life is precious, no matter what they so-called contribute. Just their being here and being a part of society, being a part of our community, that's enough. And I think that's what the Pure Land vision is trying to teach us all. Chenxing mentioned about the dream time and the visionary people seeing time and space. And this is really what, from the very beginning of the Pure Land tradition that started pretty early in the Buddhist tradition, there's archaeological evidence in the Central Asia that they found of Pure Land groups. And of course, it went through China and then through East Asia. But it's about this vision of a world where everyone's equal, everyone is free. There's no sense of oppression, no sense of discrimination. And so I think sometimes people like to characterize Pure Land tradition as, oh, they're just thinking about the afterlife. Pure Land is just some heaven that they're saying people die and they're reborn in. But right now, I noticed a couple of people have signed on that are in my monthly study group. And as we read the words of Shinran directly, what Shinran is writing for the common people of his time, he doesn't want to use all this fancy philosophical concept, but he wants to bring it to the vernacular language of his own time. What he's kind of saying is, let's have this vision of Pure Land together. Let's envision a world of equality, even though right now, for Shinran and the other people of that time, 12th century, 13th century Japan, those monks saw income equality, or just not income inequality, was this huge gap. So Dogen in the Zen tradition, both Honen and Shinran in the Pure Land, and then Nichiren in the Nichiren tradition, they saw how the common people were being oppressed, how they were being taken advantage of, how they were being treated by the so-called upper classes that were using their labor for their wealth. And so they were very aware of those people that we need to have the vision of a truly free and equal society. That's what the Buddhist sutras really are saying. So, so I guess just kind of to wrap it up in that, when we say what happened to the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, what kind of sprang up? How do you define awakening? I look to the text that we call the Larger Sutra, and it's almost like people are asking him this question: what's going on in your mind? How would you describe enlightenment? And he describes the Pure Land. He describes the total awakening of all beings, that one's awakening is not complete unless you see all beings as awakened. And he even breaks it down into these different vows. If you see the disabled people as awakened, as you see women, as you see people of different races as awakened. So it's like challenging us that what's getting in the way of our awakening is not seeing the awakening already happening in others. And so behind me, you see the statue of Amida Buddha. And so that sutra, Amida Buddha, comes to symbolize that awakening to complete equality, to the world where all beings are free and equal and enjoying wholesomeness. Thank you very much. And in closing, I say the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Patti. I really love what you said about the golden chain. It's one we return to so often and think of it as just for the Dharma school children and kids. But I feel like there are many rich lessons in there, especially in adding your line about supporting those with less privilege than myself. That's something we can all carry with us. And also to have your lens of looking at resistance and regeneration in these ways. So I think now we're going to take a little break. Is that right, Casey? We'll take about a 5-minute break. It's I show it's 18 after the hour, so we'll come back at 23 after the hour, and then we will go into our dialogue with the teachers. Thank you so much. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay, we got a 5-minute break. What do you?
Want something new, but it's more the same. All my blue skies fade to gray. Want free of the loan, but there's bills to pay. Like a big blue bird now, I could fly. Open up my heart, open up my mind, let go and cry. If only I could stop asking why. If only I weren't afraid to die. I'd talk to my heart and I'd say, be patient, have faith, ask for help, don't give up. Be patient. Ask for help. Don't give up. There's a mother's voice in my head. Says once you get up, don't you go back to bed. Get grounded in peace, like the wise one said. Back to my breathing, now I'm out of the red. Marvelous white clouds reflect on the lake. Know that my life's a game of give and take. And it's okay to make a few mistakes. Open up my eyes, now I'm wide awake. Be patient, have faith. Ask for help, don't give up. Be patient, have faith. Ask for help, don't give up. I'm back off the side of the road, remembering kindness never gets old. Don't have to fight, let your heart be bold. Solid as a rock, powers untold. Now I'm back off the side of the road, remembering kindness never gets old. Don't have to fight, let your heart be bold. Solid as a rock. Be patient, have faith. Ask for help, don't give up. Be patient, have faith. Ask for help, don't give up. Be patient, have faith. Ask for help, don't give up. Be patient, have faith. Ask for help, don't give up.
Start before the sunrise, brand new day with new eyes. I know how I'm feeling. Wake up to the bell tones without our cell phones. Close your eyes and settle in. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Beautiful night's sleep, beautiful mind's sleep.
I hope you all had enough time to take a little break. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us in this second half. My name is Casey Motimet, and it is really an honor to get to facilitate the second half of today's gathering. So I can see our three Dharma teachers are back from their break. So hopefully that was enough time for you to grab a drink of water, and thank you again for being back here with us. So this second half is going to be a little bit different than the first half, where each Dharma teacher got to share a short Dharma message by themselves. We're now going to have the three Dharma teachers spotlighted for everyone. And this is an opportunity for them to just reflect, share, ask questions of each other, anything that surfaced for you as you were listening to each other. So I just invite the three of you. Oh, there we go. I just invite the three of you, if you have any questions, to open the floor. I'm going to add each of you. Sorry about this. We're just having some spotlighting. Okay, so now the three of you should be spotlighted. You should see each other. Any initial thoughts or questions based on the Dharma sharings earlier? And if not, we've got a bunch of questions that have come in, so we can start with one of those questions.
I have a question for Chenxing and Reverend Patti. What makes you happy every day? What do you do to generate happiness? I mean, I think I have the answer, but I don't have. I want to hear.
Well, I have to admit for myself, I'm feeling kind of miserable today. I've got some physical pain and some personal things going on. But on the car ride to the temple, coming through this neighborhood in Chicago called Uptown, is very diverse. And it made me happy to see all the different diverse people, young people, old people out. It's rather warm today compared to the last few days. So just see people out and about, just that kind of lifted my mood just to see people. So I guess people watching makes me happy in some ways. Is also going for nature walks as well. So.
Yeah, I was reflecting on how nature was a theme actually in stories that the three of us told, and it snowed here last night, so that felt kind of
Oh,
magical in the dark, and it's still kind of stuck. So just little things like that. Yeah. And what about yourself, Brother Phap Luu?
You know, there are moments here when I wake up for sitting meditation. I'm sitting in our hall, and right now we're in a rains retreat with about 100 people here. And I just look around and I think, all these people sitting here in silence for 45 minutes. How does it happen? I mean, it's a big source of happiness for me that, I think just 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 seeing my brothers around and brothers and sisters, everyone just sitting there, silence, with complete trust. There's so much love. That's a big source of my happiness.
Yeah, I have to admit that a lot of people know Jodo Shinshu, we don't spend a lot of time meditation. But when I do the prison classes, we always start with meditation because it's
Mm.
just I call it a bonding time, just time to be quiet together and feel each other's presence. So.
we received a question that sort of speaks similar to Brother Phap Luu, your question, which is when when you notice yourself sort of entering extremes in thought, how do you ground yourself back into
Mm.
the middle way?
I think this has been coming up during this retreat. Ruth Ozeki was just reminding us about, in Buddhism, we talk about the sixth senses and our senses. We have these different sense gates, right? Whether it's our eyes for seeing, mouths for tasting, nose for smell, ears for hearing, right? Our skin, this haptic sense of touch. But then also our minds are these mind gates for thoughts, for feelings. And for me, it actually really helps to remember that it's just, sometimes like a really strong thought or feeling is like maybe a very foul smell. Like it's not going to last forever. So I think kind of like putting it on par. And for me, it really helps to get in touch with multiple sense gates if there when there's a tendency to like shut all the others and get really into the mind. And I think in Western culture, I think, therefore I am, there's so much emphasis on our thoughts and our feelings as being real and true and permanent. And for me, it really helps actually to a lot of somatic practices, whether it's like even though I'm nice and toasty and don't really like to be cold very much, I live with chronic pain, and so cold tends to, be hard for long periods of time. But something like being out in the crisp air, being just kind of like shaken out of a particular habit train of mind. So I find whether that's movement, whether that's being in nature, being with dogs or bunnies, which I don't have any pets, but my friends do, fortunately, just being with other beings who are having a different experience of reality, perception of reality, and reminding me just kind of that zoom out practice that I shared about that helps me. And it helps to have people around me who can remind me when I've forgotten that I need to take a step back.
I really appreciated what you had said earlier about micro practices too. And I feel like what you're talking through is a little bit of like identifying what those micro practices are for yourself.
Absolutely.
Here's a question that came in, and it came in about very specific traditions. And I feel like Brother Phap Luu, you sort of answered parts of it, but I'm still going to ask the group. What obligation do Buddhists of any practice have to actively resist things like fascism or tackling social issues? So what obligations do we as Buddhists have?
Mm.
Do we have a responsibility?
Reverend Patti, yeah.
Yeah, the other day I was watching a documentary about African refugees in Toronto, and one speaker from the Congo said, when a baby is inside the woman's body, the baby belongs to the woman. But once the baby comes out, that baby is everyone's child. And so I think that's really what Buddhism is telling us, that it's not so much an obligation or responsibility, but to see all beings around us as our child, as our, siblings, to see that. So we're moved to do what we can to alleviate their sufferings and help them out. So I don't like the word obligation or responsibility.
Mm. Yeah, I'll just add that I feel love is the core of our resistance, and it's love is always there, it's available in every moment, and it's a joy to be in love with Mother Earth, to be in love with the Dharma, to be in love with our practice, to be in love with the present moment. And so it's not a burden to resist authoritarianism because it cannot penetrate love ever. It cannot sully the unconditioned. And yeah, I think the key for me is doing it in community because then that allows it to the feelings, the emotions to circulate in a healthy way. When you rub up against your brother or sister, or there's some interaction. It's like there's a moment of. In Buddhism, we talk about shame as positive emotion, mental formation, right? That it can help us to see what to do and what not to do, and so we don't. We adjust. We're always growing, and that's like a plum village style is like that. We Tai was adamant that we had to live in community. We couldn't go off as individuals to be Dhamma teachers or whatever, but we needed to make that commitment. And he's even said the Dhamma teacher who was ordained by him in the Plum Village tradition, if they go off by themselves, they're no longer, really a Dhamma teacher in the Plum Village tradition. So it's because he saw it, that's a path of training. It's not like you're authorized to teach now and it's like done fait accompli kind of. No, it's like you're undergoing actually a bodhisattva path of training, which requires to live. Living in harmony is the litmus test of your practice, and so yeah, I do feel that our relationships with each other are the most powerful form of resistance. And it's a joy it's hard too, because it means we have to change. I mean, growing up, here in the States, I just feel like the most difficult thing for us is to change our inside. We're very good at changing our outside circumstances, move, just like go west, young man kind of thing, just find your own parcel of land. But to actually like rub up against each other and have humility and adaptability and flexibility is really challenging for people. Young people who come here for 3 months of the Rains Retreat, they some of them have left early already. They can't handle it. Yeah, it's because it's like that they're being asked to change things that nobody's asked them to change before. I mean, we're not asking, but it's like it's on themselves by living in the community that wow, oh, I have to change myself. I mean, I that for happiness and joy to be possible, I need to let go of some. The Buddha said the most difficult thing is our attachment to our perceptions and our mind, not our attachment to the body and the physical appearance and stuff. That is more easy to transform than transforming our attachment to our own perceptions of who we are and what we like and dislike and so forth. So that is, I think, the key to this kind of resistance. We need to be like water, flowing. When a hard object hits the flowing water, it cannot touch the water. The water just flows around.
You spoke about community. What if there are folks within our individual communities that we've surrounded ourselves by choice or sometimes by without choice, they're a part of our families. How do you navigate that? Like if they have beliefs that maybe are different from your own, they are still part of your community. How do you approach them? How do you navigate those situations?
Yeah, I saw that question in your preliminary emails, and people who know me know I'm familiar with that situation. Um, the thing is, it's best to really cultivate your bonds with others, and especially relationship with family, and not to use those differences of opinions as a way to cut them off or not talk to them anymore. And but my strategy is just change the subject. That's my strategy most of the time, because I think that especially the closer people are, the harder it is to change their minds. I think everybody knows that. But I still think we still have to speak up and express ourselves in different forums. But as far as close relationships, even within the Sangha, our particular Sangha in Chicago has quite a large differences of political opinions, and we just have to deal with it. We just doesn't mean we can't be friends. It doesn't mean we can't work together. We just talk about other things that we do have in common. Yeah, and in my mind, it's one time I complained at some event about somebody was really going off on something, and they said, "Well, you have to think about where that person gets their information," and we even look at ourselves. Where do we get our information? So we just have to realize we all come from different backgrounds, and we have to give grace, I think, to people if they do say things different than we think, because all of our opinions have been shaped in different ways, I think. So, so that's the way I feel about it, and that's the way I deal with it. So.
Thoughts on that question?
I Well, I was just the question. Do you think you didn't choose your family? That's my response.
Good point.
I don't assume I didn't choose my family. It's probably there for your family is there for a deeper reason.
I see a really interesting follow-up question too in the chat about, how do we address if it's not just a different point of view, but one that's harmful? Yeah, I think it's a very challenging situation and just ethically quite complicated. And I find the practice of just curiosity really serves us well. For me, well, like starting there, just being curious rather than, often it's like, oh, this person, I really disagree with them. And the first instinct might be like, well, they are wrong. Of course, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm right about them being wrong, right? So I guess in that way, I'm very similar to this person. It's very convinced they're right as well. And so at first, I find having a little bit of curiosity, and, I think and curiosity has these multiple valences, including how curious, how strange. Like there's a lot of unknowability in the world. Um, and, they probably think I'm very odd and I think they're very odd, or worse, we can feel even stronger emotions about each other. But something about bringing a little bit of that just sense of playfulness or not knowing, or like, oh, that is so interesting that this person like evokes a particular response in me every time. And then in terms of addressing harm, I think thinking about practices of loving kindness and really wanting, wishing, certain perspectives and views really do cause harm and wishing for those to be dispelled, but also discerning, am I the right person, or is actually my judgment of this person or my reaction, is it actually just entrenching this viewpoint even more, sort of like extending the half-life of a bad idea, we might say, right? Like I have to think a lot about what is skillful action. Sometimes I have to experiment, and I really appreciated how Judy opened our time together today, thinking about, when we make mistakes, how can we think about things with humility? And so, like Reverend Patty said, offering some grace, but also without, there's still a sense of accountability, right? We still speak up, or we may address the harm in a different way, but it's so context dependent, it's so relationship dependent, it so much depends on how much trust do you have with this person. And then there's just unpredictable. I think we have choice on how we act, but we can't have control over the outcome. I think that really is this teaching of karma. There's actually choice in every minute, however we want to act in body, speech, and mind. But we can't then say, I want a guaranteed outcome. That is never assured. And if we think we're going to have a guaranteed outcome, then we ourselves are in the realm of delusion.
How do we as practitioners and or those committed to liberation of all beings avoid the pitfalls of infighting and this idea of oppression Olympics? And I offer that to the group, so anyone would like to answer. And I can read the question again. How do we as practitioners and those committed to liberation of all beings avoid the pitfalls of infighting and oppression Olympics?
I was going to say you don't avoid them. One of the writers I follow is her name is Kelly Hayes. She's in Chicago, and she writes about that it's something we do have to work out in our circles. And I think Brother Phap Luu said when we're working, being together, we're going to bump into each other or rub each other the wrong way at times. So it's something we can't avoid. Maybe we just have to deal. It's just something to deal with.
I think to this theme that also I think all three of us talked about, thinking about, I think, dream time, visionary time, building toward, the kinds of refuges or worlds that we really want to live in. I think those visions to me are so based on just like an abundance model, the way we talked about Hanumodana, joy being multiplicative, seeds being able to lead to more seeds. And I think a lot of infighting, oppression Olympics really fundamentally comes from a very different view of the world that's very much based on scarcity and zero-sum game. And, that's, there's so much in our world that encourages us to see the world that way. And so for me personally, I actually find it very, very helpful to connect with different cultural spaces, whether that's Buddhist temples, whether that's just other spaces, but also connect with art, connect with things that keep giving, or that really, I don't know, finding the antidote, taking a step, a remove. Even during the Buddhist time, right? The Sangha would fragment. And I always love the story of at one point, he's just like, I've had enough. I'm going away to the forest for some time. I'm just going to spend some time with, some peaceful elephants or something. So I think sometimes it's just too much. And we have to tend to ourselves. If we're so triggered, we're so traumatized, we actually can't. It feels like an intractable situation. I think there are times where self-care and community, that's appropriate, but also I think there are some root reasons why we can tend toward these dynamics and finding spaces, places, whether that's on a written page, whether that's when chanting with a group of people, where, more is better. Like this kind of abundance is better. We don't have to keep fighting over scarce resources because they're not scarce. That's just a limitation of a mind, an obstacle of a mind.
Mm. Yeah, I really resonate with what Chenxing shared about treating, our happiness is not a scarce resource. Everyone on the planet can be as happy as can be, and we don't take any happiness away from any other person. So I think seeing that helps to let go. So letting go is essential. There's no awakening without letting go. Some kind of renunciation of our attachment to our view. And that's, like Reverend Patti said, it comes from that, like going together, and you just learn like it's not that important. And I think the reflection every day helps us. I mean, in our case, we do it through sitting meditation and other kinds of meditation throughout the day helps us to see the longer term effects of our actions and just see it's really not worth that to argue about that point because no, in the end, you're unhappy, the other person's unhappy. And so you actually, it's creating like it's like sucking away the energy of the group. And so I've also been a part of that in the past, and so learned the hard way. So I'm not saying, I'm speaking from experience. And I just learned to just let go because I remember how short life is, right? We cannot bring any possessions with us. Not this body. We inherit our actions. And so that becomes clear in meditation. You see the after effects of what you thought, said, and did, and hopefully you know what to do and what not to do in the present moment.
Thank you. I'm thinking of Reverend Patti, what you said about, wholesomeness and how everyone should have the opportunity and guarantee of wholesomeness. And the aesthetic level to me was so interesting. Like that's an interesting component that I don't always think about in Chenxing. You're talking about arts and culture, and that's such a gift, and not everyone gets that. It's a privilege. So thank you for that. So here's another question. There are systems of harm and domination beyond the interpersonal, things like systemic racism, patriarchy, ecological disasters. How can Buddhist practices help change the oppressive systems while also working on our own internal awakening? So how can we have these bigger impacts systematically while also working on ourselves? Yeah, it's a big question. How do we fix all the systems? We could break it down, like there's specific areas. Or Reverend Patti, I feel like you're on the verge of saying something. So
Well, no, I guess we have to look at our own institutions too. I think, especially, well, I don't know about everybody else, but I know in Jodo Shinshu we have a problem with the translations in English have been heavily done by male chauvinists, and there's a lot of work we have to do to take out some of that, very patriarchal language, and also to examine our texts for things. Some of the authoritarianism gets snuck into the text, so we have to be kind of look at our own institutions, how we've kind of adapted some of those systemic problems, and try to be more true to the original Buddhist idea of equality, of everybody participating. So we start with our own, but I think looking at our society, just things in the media and just things going on to help each other see those things. And how they conflict with our Buddhist principles. I think just talking about it and pointing out really helps. I have to say that I went to a Buddhist Peace Fellowship retreat, and the theme was something like caring for the earth. So I thought it was going to be about recycling and reusing and stuff, but it was about all this systemic stuff, how we have to really question the corporation and question our government, and just how society uses things, that it's not about our individual actions so much, but to look at that bigger picture. So we're so lucky with our Buddhist principles that we have a framework to critique all of that.
So Chenxing, I have a question for you, that I'm going to direct to you first, and if the other teachers would like to answer, please do so. But I feel like you've done a lot of research about Buddhism in the US, and I think this is a really interesting question. Could practices of engaged Buddhism continue in Western societies without the cultural appropriation from, I'm going to add patriarchal, Caucasian mainstream cultures, while at the same time not stripping it of its deep history, its spiritual aspects, as well as ethical facets to become another mindfulness commodity like yoga.
I mean, yes, absolutely. And it's already happening in many, many places. I had the great joy of being able to co-teach an experimental class called Listening to the Buddhists in our backyard in um, kind of the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, about 40 minutes north of Boston. And with these high school students, we visited just local temples, Vietnamese, Thai, Cambodian, Lao. There's a Chinese temple as well. And they're I mean, these are places that I think are very much steeped in English, may not be the dominant language at these places, but they are steeped in transnational relationships, in interracial and intracultural, intercultural relationships. So I think it's already happening in a lot of places. And, if actually that's the majority of Buddhists in the US, I think have this connection to lineage, to culture. And I think if there are certain spaces that seem a little bit like that is more absent, then we could ask why, and maybe we can encourage them to connect with some of their Buddhist neighbors who they may not have been so much on their radar, or there are a lot of people who aren't advertising themselves because it's a hard work, to keep say, a refugee temple alive, but people are just doing those daily practices day in and day out. And so I think visiting these temples who would often invite us for, 3 or 4 hours, and we could really see the Dharma as this lived experience that was, not at all commodified, but deeply lived in many levels. Those places give me a lot of hope. And sometimes it's up to us to expand our exposure, right, to the places we visit, get a little bit outside of our comfort zones, and then I think start communicating with each other. I think this is something Reverend Patty brought up too, that, we're so relatively few in the US Buddhism, even if the influence of religion or Buddhism and mindfulness have a very wide spread, but it's quite, I think, an extraordinary opportunity here in the US that we have so many different Buddhist traditions. I mean, even just here in this, in this Zoom space right now, it's so hybrid, and that's extraordinary. And I think remembering that there is this room for this hybridity, that when we purify or deaden or simplify Buddhism, then it's no longer alive, no longer flourishing. We need this kind of diversity for it to flourish here in this country.
That is something that I'm really excited about, getting to see the evolution of Buddhism in the US specifically, and having the opportunity to take all of these different traditions and create something that's maybe uniquely American and American Buddhism.
Yeah.
Brother Phap Luu, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Someone in our audience is really interested in becoming more active in the Deer Park community and wants to know how they can go about doing that beyond just the Sunday public days.
Great. So we're opening as many Dhamma doors as we're able to. So we have this happy farm, and so this summer and spring we've been having groups of up to 60 people coming on Saturdays to help, planting and harvesting on the farm. They just planted a bunch of, we were scaling it down a little bit in the winter because of the rain months. But we had a whole new host of folks who don't come for days of mindfulness to the meditation hall, but they do come to help with like roll up their sleeves and get their hands in the dirt. And I think like I shared, there is what we call this new. We talk about hamlets within the larger monastery. If you've been to Plum Village, there's Upper Hamlet, Lower Hamlet, New Hamlet. Here we have Solidity Hamlet, where the monks live, and Clarity Hamlet, where the nuns live. And now we've just created a new hamlet, which is called Simplicity Hamlet, which is a kind of, the lay friends who have started to move into houses at the foot of the mountain. And they meet regularly and have meals. And so it's starting to build this kind of community right at the foot of our mountain where They look to like the majority of this, the first group is to the visioning group for the school. And some of them have kids that they want to have in the school. So that's another way. I mean, that's a big commitment, but it's starting to happen. So I mention it. Um, I think finding we're for younger folks, we're starting this Action Wake Up program, out of the larger Wake Up movement, which is for young people 18 to 35, groups that meet once a week. But this one is really a deeper in-person training over 15 months. So you come for 3 months of the Rains Retreat, which is we have about 40 people here now doing that, along with the monastics, and then folks apply. We actually have a house that a donor has made available to us, and so it's gonna be like kind of like a chaperoned wake up house where when we started Wake Up, a lot of people just spontaneously created their own wake up houses in like Austin, Texas, and San Diego, but often after a few years, the initial intention got kind of watered down because they needed to pay the rent and get people to fill rooms when somebody moves out. And now, so with this Action Wake Up program, we're hoping that people get training in the 14 mindfulness trainings of the Order of Interbeing over this 9 months, and then so 3 months, and then 9 months living in the house, and then 3 months again back in the monastery where they train the next generation. Anyway, that's in like 2 minutes. I
Yeah,
could
thank
share much
you.
more about that, but and there are other ways as well that I'm happy to share later.
We can share anything in the follow-up email. So the last question, Reverend Patti, I'm going to direct to you. Are there any words that you would like to offer for folks who are feeling marginalized, ignored, silenced, and who are now reticent and feeling discouraged?
Yeah, I saw that question in your earlier email, and it's really hard because I feel that way myself a lot of times. But I guess the idea is just know there's people out there, there's people thinking of you. I think about the action that I did outside the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. The idea was we call it Liberation Obon. We did Bonodori, Japanese dancing, outside this detention center, but we wanted to give the message that we're thinking of you, of the people inside. We hope somehow to convey our joy to them and give them some kind of hope and encouragement. So I guess find those practices, find those groups, find those people that you can be involved with, and I don't know, have that sense of support. It's not easy though, because in the society it's so easy to be isolated and discouraged. But there's hope here and there, and there are groups. I've been lucky that I found different discussion groups to kind of buoy me up. So I hope all those people feeling discouraged to find to know that there's support out there. Just try to find those groups, and like I said, just find those activities that you feel together with people, and like joyful reading a book together, discussing a movie together, whatever. So, but it's hard. Yeah, I thought when I saw that question, I thought, yeah, it's very hard right now.
I think even just acknowledging that it's hard and hearing you say that is helpful and beneficial. And I'm walking away from this conversation really invested in this idea of community and like taking refuge in community with each other and nature as being a part of that community building. So thank you. I want to thank all three of you so much. Thank you, Chenxing, Brother Phap Luu, and Reverend Patti, for sharing your stories and your wisdom with us today. It was an honor for me. I know it was an honor for Judy and the planning team to get to spend time with you. And I can confidently say that I know I'm walking away feeling more hopeful and lighter. And again, really thinking about how to build community more effectively in our spaces. So thank you.
Thank you.
I thank you. I just wanted to mention that we are going to be sending the recording to everyone who registered. So even if they weren't here, they will get a copy of the recording. We'll also send a short survey as we help to plan for next year. So you're going to see that hit your inboxes. We are going to put in the chat links to the Dharma teachers' websites. So if you'd like to learn more, check out Chenxing's book, see some talks by Brother Phap Luu and Reverend Patti. You can access some of that through the links. I want to thank everyone who's donated already to the Buddhist Community Gathering. Proceeds assist in acknowledging our Dharma teachers and the future of Buddhist education programs. So thank you to those that have already donated. As a plug for Vista Buddhist Temple, we have online meditation services on Wednesdays. We also do hybrid Dharma services on Sundays, and we have a Dharma recovery program also over Zoom on Mondays. You can find all of that information on our website. I want to thank the organizers of the Buddhist Community Gathering. I want to thank Judy so much for making this happen every year. Thank you to the Buddhist Temple, Vista Buddhist Temple, for their support. And I'd now like to welcome Brother Phap Luu, who's going to close today's gathering with a merit offering.
Transmitting the Dhamma, practicing the way of awareness, gives rise to benefit without limit. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, numerous beings who give guidance and support along the path.
Thank you so much, Brother Phap Luu. Thank you all for joining us today on this Saturday afternoon. I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you again.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, dear teachers, and thank you, all of our guests.